Well, welcome back to Open to Truth, a podcast all about exploring big ideas and discovering truth together. My name's Clint.
Hi, I'm Tony. Welcome back.
And you know what's kind of interesting? 2 weeks ago, one of my family members has a son who was really struggling with his faith, reportedly. Mm-hmm. And in particular was wondering why God allowed the coronavirus pandemic.
Sure.
Which is a good question, I think,
Yeah.
to be thinking about. So I just wanted to bring that here. I did have my conversation with him via Zoom, and I think it was pretty fruitful.
Yeah.
And helped me just as I was articulating it to him, or at least how I would handle a query like that. Helped me in my own thinking. So kind of wanted to share some of that here.
Some thoughts on that. That's great. It's not a particularly new question. The question of why is there suffering in the world? Why is there evil in the world?
That's right. This is just a specific brand of it.
But great that he's thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know what you said in that conversation.
Yeah, well, I think I do just for a moment want to bring it back to just a general problem of suffering. I mean, we can imagine ways that human beings suffer or animal suffering, whoever counts in the moral community as mattering. Suffering, evil, meaning
with different things, right? Suffering.
I would say suffering is the conscious experience of an evil or the perceived evil happening in your life. And by evil, I mean a way that your life is not going as well as it could.
Is that just two ways of saying the same thing? Evil is just that which causes suffering?
Not necessarily, because you might. I mean, I'm leaving room for the case where someone with a really broken mind could be experiencing suffering with all things being equal, pretty good life, where there's not really much evil in it.
Okay.
So I'm thinking if you're like a paranoid schizophrenic or someone who thinks that people are after them. They're not. This evil is not in the world.
I see.
Their life really is not going poorly in the sense of people are hunting them down.
Yeah.
But they have this
the experience
conscious suffering.
Of that.
Yeah.
I thought you had distinguished between evil being having to do with an agent that is choosing to inflict suffering or something versus, say, a natural evil that's just a hurricane.
I would make that distinction between a moral evil and a natural evil.
Moral and natural evil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So one's life not going as well as a result of someone's actions or just the course of nature.
But both, broadly speaking, evil.
Yeah.
Coronavirus, hurricane, murderer, evil.
I think those are all ways it could impact
just so
your
we
life
know where we're starting.
Going poorly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, that's helpful to bring up. That's actually where I was going with it, that distinction, because, there's different ways that your life cannot go as well as it could, and then you perhaps accordingly suffer to a certain degree. We don't need to get too hung up on that distinction for our purposes, but if you want to use them interchangeably, I won't fault you for that.
Okay.
So first, we might want to wonder what kind of evil the pandemic really is. Is it really a natural evil? You might, because you brought up the occurrence, the example of a natural disaster, a tsunami, a hurricane, and even those on certain theories of cause and effect relationships, like the butterfly effect, where even the smallest of my actions, if I go like this, that there's now going to be
tsunami in Japan,
a whirlwind in the Mongolian steppes.
Yeah.
So perhaps that's the case. I'm not sure, but just to say that it's not hard and fast, really easy to determine what counts as a moral or natural evil in that way.
You don't think? I mean, when I think about a moral evil, I think about an agent who is intent on inflicting suffering in some way. But the coronavirus is not intent on that. The coronavirus is blowing through like the weather blows through.
I guess I want to say more agential evil. The result of an agent.
Yes, okay.
Rather than moral.
Okay.
Probably. But
let's use that term then.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And so it's just to say it's tricky to draw a boundary line between the two. Not always. Yeah. Some of them are very clearly agents, some are not.
Okay.
but there's these, some are in the gray area. Like maybe the coronavirus is one of them. I'm not trying to spread a conspiracy theory by any means.
Saying it was cooked up in a lab, mate.
But yeah, I mean, yes, that is one potential still live option.
Right.
That there was some testing in a Wuhan lab.
Yeah.
That it got leaked, and so not that it was purposeful or anything like that, but just that this is the etiology of it.
Yeah.
And okay, maybe that's the case, and in which case then someone may have made a mistake, and now it's the result of an agent introducing something into the world.
Mm-hmm.
This is important because I think this impacts how you would assess the God question.
Mm-hmm.
So we can wonder about how to carve up our world of what evils are happening with our different concepts. But then this family member was asking, what's happening? How does that relate to my faith or God?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, now we need to think a little bit about that term. What do we mean by God? What are you building into that concept that's generating the problem? Because I think the underlying worry that's maybe not always said is there's something incompatible or at least extremely unlikely with holding these two propositions. Mm-hmm. That God is omnipotent, can do all things that are possible to do, mm-hmm. as omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent or all good. Mm-hmm. So there's something, and the other proposition, there exists evil of these different varieties that we were briefly sketching. So all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God, evil exists.
What's going on?
There's a suspicion that there is tension here, that there is conflict. This ought not be. And so I leave it to the person wondering about that to try to tease that out and what exactly they have an issue with.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea is, if God were all good, then he would rather, all things being considered, there be no evil. It's kind of what it means to be good, I think, is to not desire evil. If he were all-powerful, then he would put a stop to the evil. But there is evil. So either he is not all good or he is not all-powerful. Mm-hmm. What gives?
And you can throw in the knowledge piece. Maybe he doesn't know.
He doesn't know how.
Yeah.
He could do it. He just can't figure it out.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's take each of these case by case, these different magnificent properties of this divine being. So first, omnipotence, all-powerful. That may seem like obvious what that means, but I think on closer inspection, it's not totally clear. So, I mean, what is power? First of all, what is that trait that someone can have?
The ability to make one's will manifest in the world.
Great.
I've heard you talk about this once.
That's how I would talk about it. Yeah. Yeah. The ability to place into reality or to make manifest what you desire.
What you want.
And so someone who's all powerful, then anything that they can even think of, just mental activity, by dint of doing that, could manifest it into the world. There's no gap between the way the world could be and how you want it to be.
Yeah.
Just different ways of talking about what power means. I mean, it's kind of weird. Where's power? You can't like point to it or touch it, so you have to, it's a little bit abstract.
Like a riddle.
And sometimes, like I briefly mentioned before, how this is characterized as all powerful means you have the ability to make manifest in reality anything that is possible to do so.
Sure.
So we're trying to rule out the weird paradoxes of, can God create a stone he can't lift?
Yeah. Can he make a round square? Yeah,
right.
All that.
Not possible. Not a possible thing for anyone to do, let alone God.
Yeah.
So he's off the hook for he can't make round squares. But we might wonder though, let's just wonder together right now.
Okay.
Is it possible for God to disallow the pandemic from happening? How does that strike you right away?
I'm really giving it some thought here.
That's okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to saddle you with right away.
Well, my gut says, if we're saying this God can also speak the whole universe into existence, seems like he could snap his proverbial fingers and there is no COVID virus.
Like each individual virus.
They all just disappear. They go away.
They evaporate.
Right? I mean, if he can create ex nihilo, if he can make things appear that did not appear or weren't and call them to be.
Yeah, so maybe...
Can't he do the opposite?
So we could say maybe that he could just make these things evaporate right now, or maybe someone would have preferred it not happen to begin with at all, and so can engineer certain events in the world such that doesn't come into existence in the first place.
Yeah.
Maybe a complicated story about how that works, but in any case...
It seems possible.
Okay.
To my gut. Yep.
I don't know if we need to dive into the omniscience. It's pretty similar to that last one.
Yeah.
But again, let's just put the caveat, all things that are possible to know. But there is something interesting to behold at this juncture, because certain philosophers put more things into the category of impossible to know than others.
Yeah, right.
One of them being future events. So to what degree does God really have a grasp on the future? And now we get...
When you say have a grasp, it makes him sound like an Alzheimer's patient or something who's just confused about the future. I think what you're saying, though, is that it could be the case that the universe we live in, or reality, is such that it is made up of genuine possibilities. That the future is not sort of out there waiting for you to arrive in it. All there is the present moment, the present state. That's all there ever is. And so the future isn't something that can be known. It just doesn't exist. It's an idea in our minds, you know? Is that what you're saying?
I think I was not committing myself to that.
But to explain the view that future events might not be knowable at all.
Yeah, I think so.
So it's not that they're knowable and God's just confused, can't get a grasp on it. It's like there's nothing to grasp.
Yeah. But popular culture and a lot of sci-fi trades on the falsity of that view.
Oh, yeah.
That the future actually is right now in some way. So Back to the Future, Marty McFly not only can go from 1985 to 1955 in the past, but you can go to 2015.
Yeah.
So that these different points on the timeline all kind of exist at the same time. You don't want to say that.
You don't want to say that. This is A theory and B theory of time.
Right. Very creatively named, just one after the other, right? So the A theory is just saying that it's presentism, it's sometimes called. All that ever really exists is the present moment, and it's ticking right along. The past is just as ethereal as the future.
Temporal becoming is real.
Yep.
That whole thing.
I'm genuinely stepping into a future that is not manifest. Whereas a B theory is more of this Back to the Future picture, or there's this timeline. Maybe God even sits above it. He's atemporal, looking down on the span of time, and can maybe, I don't know, move things around.
Yeah, like the universe exists in a sort of a space-time loaf with various coordinates throughout. You know, that you can be located at or travel to if you're Marty McFly and you have a DeLorean.
I'm thinking of Tim and Eric comedic special on the universe as a tube. It's making me laugh. So yeah, the A and B theory are both ways of thinking about what is time. That's a whole other tricky one to get into. But if it's the case that the B theory is correct, then I think we feel a lot more comfortable saying that God knows the future. But on A theory, it's less obvious what it means for God to know the future if the future doesn't exist in any meaningful way. Because you might think that the truth makers of a sentence, so for instance, Tony is sitting in the chair, there are different realities that those terms map onto. But when I say Clint will get Mountain Dew tomorrow, what's tomorrow? Like tomorrow it's not a thing out there that we can point to. It's not an existent, and so it's not clear what makes that true. But
now, sorry if you don't want to get too bogged down here, but isn't there an argument to be made that, you know, if God knows the current state of the universe in its entirety, this system, every location of every particle, its speed, momentum, all that, he should be able to know what the next state will be, and the one after that, and the one after that, and kind of run this calculation to determine how the whole thing will unfold over time. And obviously that sort of, there's no mention there of agency or free will. It's sort of like just the, you know,
well, that's the
billiard balls of neurons firing around in your brain informing you getting Mountain Dew at Speedway, but shouldn't he know how that will all unfold?
Well, that's the flashpoint issue in this theological debate, is whether or not God knows the outcome of genuinely free agents other than himself.
Yeah.
So God, I think, can know the future, even on the A theory, where it's a little bit trickier to figure out what that means when it's his own plans.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to do this tomorrow. Like, I really am going to do it tomorrow, so I know the future. But when it comes to me, which I'd like to think, I don't know, I'm my own agent. I'm not being determined. I know it's building into a lot of assumptions that deserve their own hearing in a whole other podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too into like defending free will here, but if I do have free will and the future is genuinely open and I can choose amongst the range of options, it just gets harder to say for sure to what degree God knows the outcomes. Now, just to get nerdy just for a second here, there's this view called Molinism.
Mm-hmm.
Is it what's his first name? Molina?
Luis Molina.
Is it Luis? Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he came up with this idea where God knows these counterfactuals of freedom, which basically means if Clinton were in this situation, then he would do this. Mm-hmm. And since he knows the prior states of the world and what the conditions will be in the future, given those previous states, then he'll know what conditions I'm in. He knows that counterfactual of freedom. Oh, what are the conditions? Well, I know when Clinton is in those conditions, he does this.
He would do this.
So he knows the future. And that's a whole area of philosophy. We can wonder, does God know counterfactuals of freedom? Mm-hmm. But that's going pretty far afield. But I think it relates to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
Because all of this to say, back to the problem of evil, if God is unaware of the future in a way that we may not have thought traditionally, then he may be not as much on the hook for being able to prevent certain things from happening because he didn't know they would.
Right.
But I don't love to resort to that as an option because I don't have a very high credence or belief level that God doesn't have these counterfactuals of freedom in his tool belt. Perhaps he does. Mm-hmm. I want to leave that open for now.
Yeah.
The third property, back to our initial kind of rubric here, we did omnipotence, omniscience, now omnibenevolence, or being all good, morally perfect. Mm-hmm. This one I would be really hesitant to give up on. I mean, that's pretty central to me for what it means to be God.
Yeah.
Like you fail to earn that title of God if you don't have the property morally perfect.
Yeah, right. It's at least a necessary condition to get the title God.
I'm less concerned about the other two, to be honest, but this one seems super important. Mm-hmm. And that just means that, well, I don't mean to say it so matter-of-factly. Almost everything I say here is contentious in philosophy, but that God always does what is morally best, is morally perfect, doesn't make moral mistakes. Not that he, and crucially, we've brought this up before, he could. He's not an automaton, similar to me. Mm-hmm. He could choose to do wrong, but just simply does not.
Doesn't.
Coupled with those, omnipotent, omniscient, all good, how could it possibly be then that evil persists? Wouldn't the powerful, good, all-knowing being prevent this horrific thing?
Yeah, it does seem like he would. I'm wondering, and again, if this is too
so
far
now
afield,
we've kind of spent a while like
setting it up.
That's stating the problem. Yeah, getting clear on our terms.
I don't know if you want to go here, but if God is omnibenevolent, he always does what is good. Mm-hmm. Is it worth talking about what kind of moral theory we think God uses? And here's where the train of thought went. Okay, if God always does what's good, is God a consequentialist, where he just maximizes the good? And how could he be one if without knowing the future? I would want him to know the full scope of the consequences, all the knock-on effects.
Why do you want that?
Because otherwise I want to know how he's making his decisions moment by moment.
Well, I think I'm fine with building into my concept. Again, no matter what we think about the future, the truth, the term omniscience is God knows everything that's possible to know. Oh, this is important. So going back to his goodness, this ties into his goodness because, well, I guess you could contest it like anything else, but typically we don't assign moral duties or a moral ought. You ought to do this if you can't do it. So I don't want to put someone on the hook for, like make them morally blameworthy for something they could not have done.
Yeah. That's fair.
I mean, right?
Yeah, that's
like,
fair.
A little kid drowned in a well in India. Clinton, how could you?
Yeah. What?
Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't possible for me. I didn't know about it. I wasn't there. So if God doesn't have access to the future or these consequences way down the road that you might think it would be nice to have, if they're just not within reach of anyone, including the divine, then they're not morally on the hook for it.
Yeah, but then I don't want him pulling the levers. If he's just as restricted,
well, not just as us, but
right. But at least in terms of the knock-on effects, it seems like he could actually do way more damage than I could. If that's the case, if he has just as little knowledge about the future as I do, who knows, he could really have some oopsies, you know?
Yeah.
Boy, shouldn't have done that. Accidentally caused coronavirus, and that seems like a weird way to conceive of God acting in the world. That there could be tremendous evils that accidentally befall us because God just didn't see it coming, or God didn't consider that could be a possible knock-on effect of some good that he did in the past.
Okay,
you know,
so
that's just weird. There's a weirdness there.
Well, not only is it weird, but I think it offers a way out. I don't necessarily love that language, but for God and the problem of evil, he's off the hook in a way or it gives you more of a reason to think that God maybe is less involved in human affairs for fear that can't foresee the consequences.
You mean an argument for his hiddenness?
Yeah,
almost?
And that like the answer to the problem of evil would be that God doesn't want to make things worse, doesn't have access to the information that would obviously make the world better, and so refrains from acting. That's why coronavirus is persisting.
And when we say acting, I'm sort of imagining some real divine intervention of tampering with physics, almost, you know, vanishing particles or whatever else. I think there is an argument to be made for maybe the primary way God is acting in the world is through conscience and through changing of the human heart, something like that, on the individual level. But he's not announcing his presence by waving his hand and having coronavirus disappear, you know?
So here's my proposed solution to this. It's not very satisfying.
Okay.
It's also not fair to call it mine.
Great.
It's been imagined for a long time.
So here's your not very satisfying plagiarized response.
Instead of hanging my hat on God's lack of epistemic access or knowledge access, I would far more comfortable hanging my hat on my own lack of epistemic access.
Okay. Unpack that.
So I think most viewers would agree, and hopefully you do as well, that we as human beings have such little access to all the available data that one could.
Oh my word.
Okay?
Yeah.
I mean
until I get my Neuralink, yeah.
Yeah. I have unbelievable lack of access to the available data I might want to have to make good decisions, just in my everyday life.
Oh yeah. No, we're groping around in the dark.
Even simple things like I don't really know for sure how fast some cars are going, and I mean, I just kind of eyeball it.
Yeah.
I don't really have any idea. Like, are they going 40 or 50? I can kind of guess.
Yeah.
But I'm making snap judgments on this stuff. There's a lot I don't know. I don't know the tensile strength in LeBron's calf muscle to know whether to bet on the Lakers this season that they'll be winning or whether he'll get injured.
Yeah.
I mean, we could spend an hour talking about all the things I don't know, probably about the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, it seems remarkably unwise and unfair for me to assume that I would know what a divine being should do when faced with a problem.
Yeah.
So here's at least from my, and even again from my perspective, it seems like a problem. The pandemic. I mean, a lot of people have died. A lot of people have lasting consequences.
Yeah, it's not good.
From the virus and the economic devastation left in its wake, and our responses and all of it. From my perspective, this seems like a really bad thing, and wouldn't it have been great to avoid it? But I'm operating from such a small perspective that actually it turns out I don't really know if that's true.
It's a problem of scope, right? You're just saying that going back to that butterfly effect thing. 2,000 years from now, how different will the world be because we had this coronavirus and all the effects of it that have led to other effects, all these ripples, that there could be some great goods that outweigh. Is that what you're saying? That on balance, things might end up better because we had this coronavirus?
That could be.
Than they would have been had we not had the coronavirus?
Yes, I don't feel like I have access to that information. There's so much I'm missing. So much. I don't know for sure.
What about...
And so that's just to say I don't have the necessary data to say that God's making a moral mistake by allowing it. So why? Okay. So back to my family member's question and the timeless one: why does God allow suffering, or why did God allow the pandemic? And I'm going to say I don't know. Not only do I not know, I can't know given my available evidence. Perhaps if I was in God's shoes and I had all of that power and knowledge and could see these things, I would be able to judge better. But I'm just not.
Yeah. What about though situations where, forget the natural evil, some what do you call it, agential evil? A serial killer is torturing and raping a little girl. Okay, that seems obviously horrendous. In what world is God ever justified allowing that to continue? It seems to me that there might be no amount of good that would justify such a horrendous thing being allowed to take place. You know, just to say that, well, yeah, 3 young girls got raped, but look what happened 1,000 years later. That doesn't satisfy me emotionally.
Right.
You know? So how would you respond to that?
So I would not necessarily say that the consequences that outweigh, I wouldn't want to like look far into the future and wonder like when are more positive points going to be accrued from such a horrific negative. It seems really crass and crude. There's just, it's such a violation. It just ought not ever happen despite what comes of it.
Right.
I think more we're comparing, I can't help but go a little bit nerdy and philosophical.
Please, that's what we're here for.
But so sometimes in philosophical theology, there's this notion of a possible world. And a possible world is just any way that the world could have been or could be. So I could be wearing a blue sweater, or this could be a yellow chair, or I became a circus trainer. Who knows? All the different ways that the world could be different, not with just me, but with any creature, any particle even.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, there's nearly infinite, right?
Yeah.
So at the beginning of time, God looks at all these different possible worlds, not actual, like looking through a cosmic telescope and looking at a planet,
right? But
different ways that the universe could unfold. And I want that one. That one's the best. And on the whole, that one perhaps is the one with the most good over the most bad. That's one way of thinking about it. And in that world, there are some rapists, but there's also other things that occur in that world that offset the wickedness done there. That's one. I don't
know if that helps me at all, though, because even then you're thinking about it in terms of, well, the good is outweighing the bad. I wonder.
I don't know if you can get away from it.
How is God? Might it be better that He never create anything than create a world where little girls are raped and murdered?
I think that is unanswerable.
And sorry, one more bone to pick. Earlier we were saying God might not know the future. So how is he looking at this array of possible worlds to see how they would all unfold? Isn't he sort of
you need to know the future,
pressing the start button blindly and then playing the game as we go?
You need to know the future for the possible worlds answer. But maybe I'm not being as clear as I could be. What I'm trying to build to is what's known as the free will defense. And this is basically the idea that, look, not only would we want to say that it's a world with free will is better, but it's the only way a world could be that even makes sense to use the term better.
Oh, say more about that.
Because agency and free will, and again, my agnostic, skeptic friends and atheists won't really endorse this because they probably don't think free will exists, but it is the source of anything significant and meaningful ever, anywhere you would go to look for it, is derived at some point from an agent, a locus of consciousness that is able to direct attention at something and curate. So without that, you can't even use the terms better or worse. You can't even surmise the question, why did God allow the bad thing? Because a bad thing, at least in this case of persons doing wrong things, it's hard to even really make sense of why you would ascribe value to it at all.
Because without free will, it's all just stuff happening.
Yeah.
There are no agents. There are no persons. There are just atoms bumping into each other. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess so. And and if it's that way, and there's consciousness, if we can somehow make sense of that.
Well, there is consciousness, right? So
yeah, but there's no consciousness and no free will.
Okay, yeah.
If I have my worries about that's coherent, but let's say that there is, then it's just. Then I don't know how you get away from the consequentialist calculation of, well, what movie can I play for all of these different loci of consciousnesses that maximizes pleasure over pain? And yeah, one movie is a horror movie where you get raped and tortured and killed.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of movies where that's not happening and good stuff's happening, and I guess I'll pick the one with more pleasure over pain. I think that's a little bit crass. I would rather go with the explanation that God wants to create value and meaning and significance in the world, and the only way to do it is through the creation of free agents. And you run the risk of those agents
abusing their freedom.
Some don't and create beauty. Some do and create wickedness and terror and the rest of it.
Okay. Can I throw this at you as well?
Yeah.
This is not a fully formed thought, so forgive me if it comes out half-baked. But thinking about in the problem of evil, I think you and I mentioned this on the Good Place episode, but I am not convinced that a world with zero suffering is really the world that I want to be in either.
Absolutely.
Right?
This is good. And I should have brought this up sooner. So yeah, there's also the notion that suffering can lead to good things.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when I give my son a timeout, I actually in my own classification, I would call that an evil. His life isn't going as well as it could be right there. He's distanced from his family. He doesn't get to be enjoying his toys. It's kind of artificially put in place by me.
Yeah.
But it's for a greater good. I've purposely, and he is suffering. I assure you, he's experiencing it. It's evidenced by a lot of his different bodily motions and sounds.
Yeah.
But it's for what I take to be, hopefully I'm being a good parent, is for the greater good of teaching some kind of lesson about, do not hit your brother in the face with your sword, play sword, or whatever he had done to harm one of his siblings.
Yeah.
Or, not shown respect to his parents or his mother or something.
Yeah.
I've purposely inflicted that to learn a lesson about this ethic I'm trying to instill in him. And there's all sorts of cases that abound like that, even ones where it seemed horrific at first, but good things led to it. I'll use a kind of controversial example, and that's the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Like frequently cited as one of the worst atrocities in human history. I'm sure there's other horrific things, but that's right up there.
Yeah.
But also, like, there are some good things that came about from that happening.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to officially say it by any means that they outweigh that. But it's,
Or to say that it was it's good that happened.
I'm never saying that.
Yeah.
That I think
Okay.
that's a confusion. I want to be very firm in saying, like, that some things are evils.
Yeah.
And that you might even allow or even inflict them for a good to come, maybe, but at least allow.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948. Like that, I don't know if that would have happened without, like, the Jews being so oppressed and killed and genocide happening, that the UN stepped in and made that happen. And it's hard to really calculate the amount of good that came from that state. I mean, some, might think that it's a abjectly evil state. I'm sure some Palestinian activists might think that way, but there's a whole host of lives and businesses and culture and stuff that's flowed out from that area that, and like the Jews finally have a home in the world for after 2,000 years. It's hard to calculate. So am I going to definitively say that on the whole, the Holocaust created more evil in the world than good, like looking down the corridor of time? Well, I'm going to hold my tongue on that. I don't know for sure. Now, maybe that sounds crazy to someone, and I think it's because I'm being misunderstood, if that's the case. I am not saying that Hitler should have done what he did, or that I'm glad that the Holocaust happened. No, that's not the case. Very evil thing that occurred. What we're asking is God a moral monster for allowing that to take place? And so first we'd have to say that God would override the free wills of all parties involved in the nonsense and the horror, which we gave reason to think that that's maybe not something God would be able or want to do. And then it's also just not clear that, like, I'm just not in God's position to know what the effects are of that going out into human history. Also, very important to think about, what if that wasn't as bad as it could have been?
Right.
And this is like, sometimes where theists go more often, like more devout theists, I suppose, that are really into providence, would say, like, that God is extremely at work in the world.
Right.
And things would be way worse if he were not. And I'm open to that. Like, I can actually imagine world events.
I can imagine a worse world than this.
Yes.
Right.
And who knows? And we can say the same thing about the pandemic.
Yeah.
And this is so fascinating. I won't reveal his exact age, but a young, like, almost teenage boy is the family member, and he brought up a really fascinating point about this. He's like, as you're talking about this, it's making me think of climate change, and say what you will, I'm not, like, as brushed up on all of that and the exact details, but suppose climate change is an enormous imminent problem for humanity. Well, as it happens, it's less of a problem in 2020 than it was in 2019. There's just far less pollution,
right,
and so as a result of the pandemic,
right.
And I don't know, I didn't fact check him, but he mentioned that he had read a little article saying that it bought us 20 years of time to solve the climate problem.
Wow. So
if that's true, and I don't know if that is, but that is interesting to consider.
Yeah.
That there's this existential threat facing humanity, that we gain some time by having life artificially slowed down through this crazy pandemic, and we're just not, industry has grinded to a halt in some ways, which obviously is bad and has its negative effects and evils in the world. But my contention is that we aren't in a position to know for sure whether the world would have been worse without it, or whether a better world will result in the future. There's just so much unknowns. What I'm trying to do ultimately is I'm not trying to. what I happen to be doing is echoing the noises that Job makes in the Bible, and God's answer to Job of asking, what did I do to deserve the evils that occurred in my life? And God just spends 3 chapters giving a list of rhetorical questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Where were you when I created Leviathan and Behemoth?
Yeah.
And where were you when I put Pleiades in the night sky? And all these things where, okay, no, I wasn't there. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're not in my
Your
shoes.
scope is so limited.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not at no point does he say that the good does outweigh the bad.
Or that evil hasn't befallen you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. Just that we're not in a position to make the final call.
So it's not emotionally satisfying in the sense that I don't have an exact reason to tell you why God allowed this particular thing to happen, or what we might call a robust theodicy, a defense of God's justice. Oh, I know why he allowed the Holocaust, or I know why he allowed the pandemic.
Well, and those tend to come across trite and almost insulting as well.
Or I know why he allowed you to have cancer, so you would grow in your patience.
Oh my god.
Oh no, dude, I
I
don't know
don't
about
want to hear that. Yeah.
And so not only I'm not really convinced it's true. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I can know given my available evidence.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to make a judgment on God's moral character. So as such, what this means is the problem of evil, that question, particularly when phrased in a negative, like, God should have prevented it from happening, but it did. Therefore, God either doesn't exist or doesn't have one of those 3 lauded properties. If that argument doesn't work, what that means is that was offered as a defeater for theistic belief.
Yeah.
You ought not believe in God at all, or as you've traditionally thought about God on the basis of this. But if that argument doesn't work, then that defeater is no longer in place, and I could still rationally be a theist. I may not have an answer to why God always does those things. I don't think I'm owed an answer either. Mm-hmm. But I could have independent reasons for thinking that God is good. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in other podcasts, but that's my basic response to any kind of problem of evil, whether from man or matter, however it befalls us.
Yep.
I just don't think we're in the position to know God's morally perfect reasons for allowing it, if God is that way and God exists.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Good talk.
Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, what do you think? Just what's your reaction to that?
I mean, yeah, I don't find it very satisfying. It
is it unfair? Like, does it?
No, I just don't find it emotionally satisfying. Mm-hmm. Now that it ultimately boils down to it. Boy, we don't know much though, do we? It's like, well, yeah, I guess so. It really seems bad though. Some of the stuff that's happening. Mm-hmm. It really seems like it would be better if the world didn't have that in it. But I understand on a rational level when I think about it. I'm just not in a position to say what the world would be like without X evil, whatever it happens to be.
Do we have time for a little excursus? Because
sure.
Now I feel bad that I may not have been fair. So let's just... Okay, real quick. Because I think some viewers would say, like, no, wait, but I do know that God shouldn't have let this thing happen. There's just no reason to allow it. So a classic case that this philosopher William Rowe brought up is like the injured fawn example. So imagine a Bambi figure galloping across the plains and it gets struck by lightning. Oh, geez. And a big gash wound appears in its side, and it's been like paralyzed, and it bleeds out over the course of 3 days and dies. Mm-hmm. We don't know anything else about the story really, but it just why not? Why couldn't God just like turn off the suffering mechanism, like make it unconscious so it doesn't experience the pain? But it seems like if we were to go and observe it, you could you could detect that it is still unconscious suffering. If you were to try to injure it more, it would yelp.
Yeah.
So like God didn't turn that off, most likely. So like isn't that make it so that probably God doesn't exist? Like wouldn't a morally perfect God
wouldn't he just, or at least lessen that suffering in some way? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like what's really being lost? Because that example, I think, helps make it a little bit more clear why there are some cases that seem like they don't have this grand impact on the future history of the world.
Right.
Like kingdoms won't rise and fall on the basis of them Bambi falling ill, and
they seem over the top or
sometimes called gratuitous.
Really unnecessary suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, it's called the problem of gratuitous evil, which is another way of phrasing it. Mm-hmm. Just to say, yeah, like the example with my son, that wasn't, maybe it's a case of evil, but it's not gratuitous. It's for a reason. It's for its own good.
Yeah.
But gratuitous evil is such that it does not warrant, it didn't warrant whatever good you thought would come from it. It was just
or it's more than what is necessary to produce the good that would come from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We want the minimal necessary suffering.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you are confident, or you hope at least, that there is no such thing as gratuitous suffering?
I do hope.
Yeah.
But I also don't know.
Don't know.
It's the same answer.
It's one of the questions.
Yeah.
That leads you to search for a rescuer in some way.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to maybe end with that, like kind of pumping up the case on behalf of the atheist or agnostic. Like, I think there are strong cases to bring up. My answer would still be the same.
We don't know.
I don't think you're in the epistemic position to know one way or the other the reasons that God has and to adjudicate them.
Yeah.
From your perspective.
Yeah.
And like one quick answer would be like, well, are you saying like he should prevent the lightning from striking? And then wouldn't God's reasons for, like, if he's going to prevent that lightning strike, why not prevent other lightning strikes that cause pain?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you start to get into a weird world where like we don't have, like we live in a strange place, like
reliable laws of physics and stuff.
Like we live in a weird Truman Show where strange things happen that always prevent pain, or like you can't fire bullets into bodies, like they always end up bouncing off.
Yeah,
but I can always fire a bullet at a tree or something.
Yeah.
And so it ends up becoming a free will defense again, because if God desires people to have free will to freely come into a relationship with God, then they detect that they're in this weird world where there's strange rules, where
someone's tampering.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, God for sure exists. Well, I better just believe in him and try to be a good boy and follow the rules or something. And God's just not in the business of creating people that follow him in that way. Perhaps that's one answer.
Right.
But okay. I kind of want to leave it on a more uncertain note, because I think that is the tenor of the position I'm arguing for. It's like
it's a big we don't know.
I genuinely don't know the mind of God. I don't purport to know. I don't think I can know. As much as that case might seem compelling at first, I just don't know the lasting effects of different things. And
yeah. Fair enough. Well, if you enjoyed this conversation and you want to join it, you want to add something to it, leave a comment on this video or write into the show. You can reach us at opentotruth.com or opentotruthpodcast@gmail.com if you want to email us directly. We would love to hear from you. How do you handle the problem of evil? And what did you think of this conversation? Was it helpful at all?
Also, just to be super honest, I have just discovered today that I may have been doing our blog incorrectly, and I apologize. So
Confession.
I know that this YouTube video or channel gets quite a bit more views than the blog.
Yeah.
I was wondering why, but if you like the audio content, I actually write a blog each week about these topics and get a little bit more nuance and some different ideas that we didn't bring up here. So be sure to go to the website and sign up to be it's just one email a week. I don't want to spam anybody, but you can get a notification to your inbox.
You can get bite-sized philosophical musings sent straight to your inbox.
They're 3 to 4 minute reads. Once a week.
Short, easy, thought provokers.
Yep.
Okay. Be awesome. So if you enjoyed this content, like, subscribe, stick around. New content every week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Stay curious.
Thanks.